Joint military operations in the Middle East have entered a new and potentially more dangerous phase after a ballistic missile launched from Iran was intercepted while heading toward Turkish airspace. The incident occurred late on March 4, 2026, when radar systems across the eastern Mediterranean detected a missile launched from within Iranian territory. The projectile traveled across Iraq and Syria before approaching the airspace of Turkey, a NATO member state. According to regional defense monitoring systems, the missile was detected shortly before midnight. NATO's integrated air and missile defense network immediately tracked the object and initiated an interception sequence. A NATO interceptor missile launched from defense systems in the eastern Mediterranean destroyed the incoming ballistic missile before it reached its target. The interception occurred at high altitude, and debris from the destroyed missile later fell into the sea and coastal areas near the Turkish province of Hatay, which borders Syria. Residents of the region reported seeing fragments of metal falling from the sky after a bright flash above the horizon. Local authorities confirmed that the debris originated from the aerial interception of the missile. No casualties or infrastructure damage were reported in Turkey, but the event quickly escalated diplomatic tensions across the region. The most serious concern for Turkish and NATO officials was the trajectory of the missile. Defense analysts noted that the flight path placed areas near the Incirlik air base within potential risk. The base hosts important NATO military elements and has historically been used by allied forces for operations in the Middle East. Turkish officials had previously stated that the base was not involved in the joint airstrikes carried out by the United States and Israel against targets inside Iran. Nevertheless, the possibility that a ballistic missile launched from Iran could threaten an area connected to NATO infrastructure raised immediate alarms within the alliance. The missile incident came during an already volatile period in the region. In recent days, the United States and Israel have conducted a series of coordinated airstrikes targeting Iranian military facilities. According to reports, those operations resulted in the deaths of multiple high-ranking Iranian officials and significant damage to military infrastructure, including elements of Iran's naval forces. The air campaign has intensified pressure on the Iranian leadership and expanded the geographic scope of the conflict. Iran had previously directed military actions towards several Gulf states, and according to regional monitoring reports, had also threatened areas connected to European Union territory, including southern Cyprus. However, the missile incident involving Turkey marked the first time during the current crisis that a NATO member state was directly threatened by a ballistic missile launched from Iran. Turkish defense officials reacted quickly after the interception. The Turkish Ministry of National Defense issued a statement confirming the violation and emphasizing that the country would defend its territory and airspace against any threats. Officials described the incident as serious and said it would not be treated as a routine airspace violation. Diplomatic channels were activated immediately following the event. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan contacted Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi by phone to demand clarification regarding the missile launch. At the same time, the Iranian ambassador in Ankara was summoned to the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs for an official explanation. Turkish officials stated that the country possesses both the will and the capability to protect its sovereignty and security. The response also came from the highest level of the Turkish government. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan confirmed that Ankara had coordinated its response with NATO allies and had issued clear warnings intended to prevent similar incidents in the future. According to statements released by the presidency, Turkey had taken all necessary precautions and would continue monitoring developments along its borders and in the wider region. The event raised immediate questions within international security circles about whether the incident could trigger Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, the clause that treats an attack on one member as an attack on all members. Analysts noted that the interception of the missile prevented direct damage or casualties, but the trajectory of the projectile toward Turkish territory placed the issue at the center of alliance discussions. Officials in Washington sought to lower tensions. During a press conference in the United States, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth stated that American authorities were aware of the incident and were examining the details of the missile interception. He said that it was necessary to determine the type of missile involved and the circumstances surrounding its launch before drawing broader conclusions. According to Hegseth, the United States did not currently believe that the situation would trigger the activation of NATO's collective defense mechanism. NATO headquarters also issued a response. Alliance spokesperson Alison Hart condemned the targeting of Turkey and reaffirmed NATO's commitment to the defense of all member states. She stated that the alliance stood firmly with Turkey and was closely monitoring developments related to the incident. The missile interception has added another layer of uncertainty to a rapidly evolving regional crisis. While airstrikes by the United States and Israel continue to pressure Iran's military leadership, the attempted strike toward Turkish territory has introduced NATO directly into the strategic calculations of the conflict. The incident has intensified diplomatic communication among regional powers and raised new questions about how the conflict could expand beyond the battlefield already unfolding inside Iran. While diplomatic discussions were continuing after the interception of the ballistic missile aimed toward Turkish airspace, another development began to attract attention among military analysts and international observers. Reports emerging from the region suggested that the conflict surrounding Iran could soon expand beyond aerial operations and potentially move toward ground activity along the country's borders. According to information reported by several international media outlets, Kurdish militia groups located in the semi-autonomous Kurdish region of northern Iraq have intensified contacts with representatives of the United States. The discussions reportedly focus on the possibility of launching operations against Iranian security forces in western Iran, particularly in Kurdish-populated areas close to the Iraqi border. Military strategists note that air power alone rarely results in the immediate collapse of a political regime. Air campaigns are often used to weaken military infrastructure, destroy command centers, and disrupt logistics networks. However, full territorial control or direct political change typically requires forces on the ground. Analysts say this logic appears to be influencing current strategic planning in Washington. Reports indicate that Kurdish militia groups in Iraqi Kurdistan have recently held meetings with U.S. intelligence officials. The discussions allegedly involve potential coordination aimed at targeting weakened Iranian security structures along the border region. These militias include Iranian Kurdish groups that have historically opposed Tehran's authority and maintain bases in the mountainous areas near the frontier. Sources cited by Axios and Reuters reported that U.S. President Donald Trump personally held phone conversations with several Kurdish leaders regarding developments related to the conflict. While official details of those conversations have not been publicly disclosed, the reports suggest that the discussions focused on the evolving military situation and the potential role of regional forces in future operations. According to the same reports, the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency may be involved in providing logistical support, weapons, and operational coordination to certain Kurdish militia groups if ground activity begins. These allegations have not been officially confirmed by Washington, but they have fueled speculation about the next phase of the conflict. Security analysts emphasize that such a strategy would represent a significant shift in the structure of the confrontation with Iran. Rather than relying solely on Western military forces, the United States could utilize local, non-Western armed groups operating near the Iranian border. The goal would be to open new fronts against Iranian security forces while the country remains under pressure from ongoing airstrikes. The strategic objective of such an approach would extend beyond capturing limited border positions. Experts say the broader aim would be to exploit the internal disruption that has already affected Iran's leadership structure following the deaths of senior commanders and the reported killing of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei during earlier airstrikes. If Kurdish militias were to cross into Iranian territory and begin attacks on local security installations, the move could force Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps and other security institutions to divide their forces across multiple fronts. Such a development could create additional strain on already weakened command structures and complicate Iran's ability to maintain internal control in major cities. Analysts describe this type of pressure as a strategy intended to create a chain reaction of military and political instability. The objective would be to overwhelm Iranian security institutions by forcing them to simultaneously confront external air attacks, cross-border ground clashes, and growing internal unrest. The possibility of Kurdish involvement in the conflict also highlights the changing balance of power among Iran's regional proxy networks. For years, Tehran relied on a network of allied armed groups across the Middle East, commonly referred to as the Axis of Resistance. These proxy forces were designed to apply pressure across multiple regions if Iran itself came under direct military attack. However, recent developments suggest that the coordination of these groups has weakened significantly. The breakdown began during the large-scale military confrontation known as Operation Epic Fury, which started on February 28, 2026. During that period, expected synchronized responses from multiple proxy groups failed to materialize. One of the most prominent components of Iran's proxy network is Hezbollah in Lebanon. For decades, the group has been considered one of Tehran's most powerful regional partners, yet its operational capabilities have been significantly affected by conflicts that took place between 2023 and 2025. Those confrontations damaged key infrastructure and disrupted parts of the group's command structure. Following the escalation in Iran in March 2026, Hezbollah launched limited rocket attacks aimed at targets in northern Israel and parts of southern Lebanon. Several salvos were fired on March 2nd and March 3rd. Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem publicly stated that the group would fulfill its duty, framing the attacks as a gesture of solidarity with Iran. Israel responded quickly to those rocket launches. Israeli air forces conducted retaliatory strikes targeting infrastructure connected to Hezbollah in the southern suburbs of Beirut. The exchanges remained limited and did not expand into a broader confrontation, leaving the Lebanese front unable to provide direct strategic support to Iran during the crisis. In Iraq, where Tehran has historically maintained deep influence, several militia groups also attempted to demonstrate support for Iran. Organizations such as Kataib Hezbollah claim to have launched drone attacks against U.S. military facilities in the country. However, U.S. and coalition intelligence had already identified possible preparations for such actions. Between March 1st and March 3rd, coalition aircraft conducted preemptive air operations targeting areas and storage depots associated with those militias. The strikes reportedly disrupted their command networks and reduced their operational capacity. In addition, pressure from the Iraqi government and Kurdish authorities limited the ability of these groups to coordinate broader regional actions. As a result, while Iran's proxy organizations remain active in several countries, their ability to act as a unified military network appears significantly diminished. Analysts say the weakening of this external support structure has increased Iran's vulnerability at a moment when the country is already facing sustained military pressure from outside its borders. While regional proxy networks appear weakened and external military pressure on Iran continues, developments inside the country are adding another layer of instability. Reports from international organizations and monitoring groups indicate that the ongoing airstrikes and political uncertainty have triggered a wave of population movement, particularly from the capital and several western provinces. According to data cited by United Nations sources, approximately 100,000 people left Tehran during the first 48 hours following the beginning of large-scale airstrikes carried out by the United States and Israel on February 28, 2026. The departures were recorded at highways leading out of the capital and at fuel stations on major routes toward western and northern provinces. Local authorities reported heavy traffic congestion as residents attempted to leave the city with limited belongings. Humanitarian observers say the movement reflects growing uncertainty among civilians as military operations intensify and communication networks inside the country become unstable. Families were seen leaving residential areas with personal vehicles, while others sought temporary shelter outside urban centers. Although the departures do not yet represent a mass refugee exodus, international agencies say the trend could accelerate if the conflict expands or if security conditions deteriorate further. The possibility of large-scale population movement has already influenced decisions by neighboring countries. Turkey, which shares a border of more than 500 kilometers with Iran, announced temporary restrictions at several major border crossings following the escalation of the conflict. Turkish authorities confirmed that passenger crossings at the Gurbulak, Kapikoy, and Esenderi border gates were suspended on both sides shortly after the missile incident targeting Turkish airspace. The Turkish Ministry of Trade stated that the measures were introduced immediately as a precaution against potential humanitarian pressure at the frontier. Under the current rules, cargo transport is still permitted, but is being conducted under controlled procedures. Turkish officials indicated that the restrictions are intended to maintain border security while monitoring developments inside Iran. Despite the restrictions, officials in Ankara have acknowledged that the country could face humanitarian responsibilities if the conflict leads to a large civilian displacement. Turkey currently hosts more than 74,000 Iranian citizens with residence permits and approximately 5,000 recognized refugees from Iran. Analysts say that in the event of a major humanitarian crisis, the Turkish government may eventually have to reopen controlled crossings for civilians seeking safety. Another issue discussed within Turkish policy circles concerns the large population of people of Turkish origin living inside Iran. Iran's total population is estimated at approximately 93 million. Within that population, experts estimate that between 15 and 20 million residents identify as ethnic Turks, particularly in regions stretching from Tehran to the northwestern city of Tabriz. The presence of this large community has led to internal discussions in Ankara about possible contingency planning should security conditions inside Iran deteriorate further. So far, officials say there has been no mass cross-border exodus into Turkey. Only several hundred people have reportedly been evacuated or relocated through official channels. However, analysts warn that the situation could change rapidly if fighting spreads, or if economic and social conditions continue to worsen. Economic factors have already played a significant role in shaping the current crisis. Iran has been experiencing severe economic pressure since late 2025. In December that year, protests began in Tehran's Grand Bazaar, after the Iranian rial fell sharply in value against the US dollar. The currency reportedly approached levels of approximately 1.4 million rials per dollar, reflecting one of the most severe currency depreciations in the country's recent history. At the same time, the cost of food and basic consumer goods rose dramatically. Economic data cited by analysts indicated that food prices increased by an average of 72% over the course of a year, while annual inflation approached 40%. The rapid rise in living costs triggered protests across several cities. Demonstrations that began as small gatherings among merchants and workers expanded into wider public protests during January 2026. Authorities eventually suppressed those protests, but the underlying economic pressures remained unresolved. The recent military escalation has added new stress to an already fragile domestic environment. Analysts say that the combination of economic crisis, military attacks, and political uncertainty could further weaken public confidence in the country's leadership. Reports have also emerged suggesting divisions within parts of Iran's security forces. Some observers claim that economic hardship and the intensity of the conflict may be affecting morale among personnel responsible for maintaining internal order. Although independent verification remains limited, several reports during earlier protests suggested that certain members of the security apparatus had shown signs of reluctance when confronting demonstrators. Another factor influencing the current situation is the disruption of Iran's communications infrastructure. Cybersecurity analysts report that a large-scale infiltration operation carried out by Israel's Unit 8200, together with the United States Cyber Command, has disrupted segments of Iran's internal communication networks. These networks previously served as secure channels used by military and government institutions to coordinate responses during emergencies. According to cybersecurity monitoring groups, the disruption has complicated command and control within several branches of the Iranian security structure. With some secure channels no longer functioning normally, reports suggest that officers in certain areas have resorted to less secure communication methods to coordinate activities. Analysts say such disruptions could affect the speed and reliability of operational decisions during a crisis. Taken together, the developments illustrate a complex situation in which military pressure from outside Iran intersects with economic difficulties and internal instability. Regional proxy networks that once supported Tehran appear weakened, while neighboring countries are preparing for potential humanitarian consequences. International observers emphasize that the future trajectory of the conflict will depend on several factors, including the continuation of air operations, the possibility of ground activity near Iran's borders, and the ability of Iranian authorities to maintain internal stability. The coming weeks are expected to be critical in determining whether the crisis remains limited to military confrontation or evolves into a broader region.